Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. We're back with another video on Skybound's Energon Universe. This time, we're taking a look at the second issue of Destro. And you know, it's funny, I feel like all the second issues from the other G.I. Joe miniseries don't quite measure up to their respective first issues, or the issues that would follow in the case of Duke and Cobra Commander, which is not to say that those second issues were bad, it's just that I don't think that they were as strong. Well, the Destro series seems to buck that trend, bypassing the second issue slump altogether, arguably even crafting a stronger second issue than the opening salvo of issue number 1. This is accomplished by upping the stakes considerably, both in terms of action and the intricacies of the plot. I feel like the first issue of Destro was not necessarily filled with shocking reveals or tantalizing mysteries, sort of thing I feel like first issues tend to rely on. Everything may have seemed sort of straightforward, but I still liked the shape the story was taking so far. While it may have lacked hype-building intrigue, that first issue was very character-driven, and the character of Destro that we saw there was enough to keep me invested despite the trajectory of the plot appearing to be fairly straightforward. However, issue 2 reveals that the events of this series might not be so straightforward or simple after all. In other words, Waters kept things pretty close to the vest in the introductory chapter, and we get quite a bit more intrigue and mystery in this issue. There's a web of deceit underlying this issue, and it all revolves around the big conflict that was hinted at in issue number 1, namely M.A.R.S. Industries and Extensive Enterprises going to war with each other. Destro's motive appears to be retaliation for the damages and lives lost, not to mention the injury to M.A.R.S.'s reputation following the attack on the Darklanian Arms Fair. Tomax and Xamot, on the other hand, also feel the need for retribution, as they believe the attack was a false flag committed by Destro himself to drag Extensive Enterprises' name through the mud of the illicit weapons and mercenary underworld, as well as justifying further aggression. Neither side gives away anything that proves that they might be lying, and there's even a moment where the three men agree to meet and discuss how to move forward that feels very familiar, as in I feel like we've seen it in numerous stories across multiple types of media, where two opposing sides double and maybe even triple down on their assumptions without considering that their antagonists might be telling the truth and that there could be another option. In this case, that other option very well could be a third party orchestrating a conflict between M.A.R.S. and Extensive Enterprises. To what ends, I couldn't say. But when you look at the setup, there's a case to be made that Destro and the Crimson Twins are being manipulated. Cobra Commander was unhappy with Destro's move on Darklania, so could the Commander be attempting to exert control over Destro, and the stuff with Extensive Enterprises was an unintended consequence, or part of a longer-form plan? Or what about a story of carlton-ritz, who was featured somewhat prominently in the first issue, but was completely absent in this one? That's a little suspicious, isn't it? Could she be provoking a conflict between the two companies, or involved in some way? Again, I don't know to what end, but you have to admit, considering that kind of changes the whole thing with the dud at the end of issue number 1. Maybe Astoria doesn't have the same sort of effect on machinery that she did in the cartoon, and this was all a bit of theater to spur on the conflict. Or maybe not. Maybe it's a completely unknown third party. Or maybe it was even one of the two major players in M.A.R.S. or Extensive Enterprises. I saw a comment in the video for the first issue saying that Destro putting himself at risk to save Astoria seemed out of character. And while I think Waters gave some reasoning for why Destro might do something like that in the afterword to the first issue, I have to admit it becomes a lot more suspicious when the nature and intent of the drone strike is called into question, like it is in the second issue. There's certainly a mystery to untangle here, one that works well with the G.I. Joe brand in my opinion, but unlike Duke, where our protagonist was much more reliable and trustworthy, it's harder to take the Crimson Twins or Destro at their word here, which in turn feeds into the intrigue. And this is a mystery that's pretty well constructed, I have to say, as in the first issue, there's a very timely and intentional cut away from Tomax making a comment about missing the arms fair in Darklania, Campania and finding opportunity in setbacks, which seems to imply that they were behind the attack. Then this issue pulls back and makes us question what we initially assumed. Just makes me feel like Waters knows what he's doing here, leaving breadcrumbs to lead us in the wrong direction. While I'm not willing to rule out that the Crimson Twins might be lying, I've kinda got my eye on Destro as more likely to be orchestrating some grand design here. Going back to the first issue again, Destro hatches some kind of unknown plan when talking to the statues of his ancestors, and when he realizes he's going to war at the end of the issue, he smiles. I can't help but wonder, why is that? Maybe because everything is going according to plan? And again, considering this possibility makes the dud look more suspicious, calling into question whether or not the event was staged, only in this scenario by Destro, which might explain why Destro was perhaps uncharacteristically willing to put himself into harm's way. But I don't know, when you start getting into a very precise scenario like that, where one little error could completely end the game prematurely, it calls into question whether or not it's realistic to think that it was staged. I really don't know what's going on here, and that's got me a lot more invested in uncovering the truth. The option of another party being involved beyond Extensive Enterprises and M.A.R.S is maybe given more credence when we see Chameleon make a last-page cliffhanger appearance, reporting to a character named Overkill, which, to be completely honest, is a character I wasn't familiar with and had to look up. This guy was outside my admittedly limited scope of G.I. Joe knowledge, but from what I learned, Overkill has been depicted as both fully robotic as well as a half cyborg. So an interesting addition to a shared universe with the Transformers, to be sure, but also a timely one when considering Destro's production of the Bats, as Overkill is described as a prototype of an advanced generation of Bats, which functions as a battlefield commander for the automated troopers. So this character's existence presents another enigma. Is Overkill proof of third-party involvement, or evidence that Destro is pulling the strings, or none of the above? Whatever the case, Chameleon's dialogue certainly doesn't suggest that she's in on any scheme cooked up by Destro himself, so it's all very much currently up in the air. Regardless, this issue is pretty action-packed, showing us larger-scale conflicts, though admittedly still of a fairly isolated nature as Extensive Enterprises and M.A.R.S throw their respective troopers at one another. Structurally, this issue is a lot of fun, showing us just how evenly matched the Crimson Twins and Destro are by flipping back and forth between the two sides of the conflict, using narration boxes with a silver tag to denote Destro and a red one to indicate the Crimson Twins, as each side acts and reacts to the escalating actions of war, ultimately marching towards a stalemate where both the silver and red tags are used in the final narration box to show just how evenly matched and in sync the leaders of these companies are. This is kind of the first instance of a battle of this scale and magnitude in the Energon universe so far, where we have these two armies going at it. From what I know of his work on Birthright, crowd battle scenes are definitely one of Bressan's strengths as an artist, so he's put to really good use here. And while I enjoyed seeing the Crimson Guard bring out the asps in this great looking page that is textured and colored beautifully, the highlight of the battle for me was definitely the Bats emerging from the destroyed production facility and attacking the Crimson Guard. It's like a mix of the Terminator and general zombie imagery here, and while we don't get a ton of panels out of it, we get just enough for it to be really memorable and very effective. I'm loving the way Bressan draws both the Crimson Guard and the Bats. I really think his style is all around just a good fit for a G.I. Joe book. And the color work seems a bit more on point with the CGs in this issue as well, doing away with the gold accents from the first issue in favor of a more classic color scheme, which isn't a big deal either way, but I think the classic colors just look a touch better. And while we don't see a return of the Prophet Director suit from the previous series, we do get some new threads for Destro during his negotiations with Tomax and Xamot. Ever since we saw his red suit Duke, I've find myself weirdly fascinated by Destro's wardrobe, and I want to see it expanded, which is admittedly never something I would have expected for myself, but here we are. But that's pretty much all I have for this issue. I dug it quite a bit more than the first issue, actually, and it bumped up my overall interest and enthusiasm for the series considerably. I'm pretty eager to learn more about Chameleon and Overkill, and really just see where all this is going. But I'm going to get out of here, so let me know what you thought about this issue. Like, comment, subscribe, etc. Thank you for watching this. It's always appreciated. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.